So welcome. I'm Rabbi Micah Streifer. I'm the director of Laasok, and I'm really excited to welcome all of you, or welcome you back for this eighth and final installment in our Social Justice in Our Text series. I don't feel that we can begin right now without acknowledging the very distressing and scary moment that we're living in. Even as we come together here to discuss social justice in Jewish texts, I know my heart is in the East, and I imagine many of you share that with me. We hold close the people of Israel and all those innocent civilians that are in harm's way right now. Unfortunately, Jewish tradition is no stranger to war, and so it gives us words to say in moments like this. So I would offer this prayer, and I'll invite you to join me if you'd like. Oseh shalom bimromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'al kol yoshvei tevel ve'imru. Amen. May the one who makes peace in the high places make peace upon us, upon all Israel, and upon all the world, and let us say, Amen. Now, today we'll be studying with Rabbi Denise Eger regarding Judaism and LGBTQ plus identity. This is a topic that takes on renewed urgency in light of government actions that marginalize and oppress members of the 2S LGBTQIA community. I'm really glad we can be together here to study with Rabbi Eger. This is also the final session in our year-long series on social justice in Jewish texts. So I want to take a moment to thank and acknowledge our co-sponsors and those who have made this year of study and resistance possible. This session is co-sponsored by A Wider Bridge, the organization of which Rabbi Eger is currently serving as executive director. And the Social Justice in Our Text series as a whole has been co-sponsored by the Central Conference of American Rabbis, the CCAR Press, the organization Tzedek Box, Dayenu, a Jewish Call for Climate Justice, the Union for Reform Judaism, Kirva, Keeping It Sacred, Central Synagogue, Temple Israel in Greater Miami, and Temple of Israel in Wilmington, North Carolina. I also want to say a huge thank you to Robert Goldman and Lauren Davis for their generous support in helping make this series happen, as well as to all of you who have made contributions to Laasok toward the Social Justice in Our Texts program, which is a number of you that are with us here today. Laasok is a not-for-profit committed to creating inclusive, progressive spaces in which to study our Jewish sacred texts. And we do rely entirely on your contributions to make this kind of programming happen. So if you're interested in contributing, please do visit our website and consider making a donation. I'll just put some information in the chat there. As well as you're interested in further study, just drop me an email, and I just put my email into the chat as well, and I'd be happy to talk with you about study opportunities through Laasok. Finally, the third thing I just put in the chat is that the CCAR Press has offered us an exclusive discount on Rabbi Eger's book, Mishkan Ge'ava, Where Pride Dwells, and the instructions for how to get that book and which discount code to use are all in the chat. Couple of quick technical notes. First of all, we are going to ask you to stay muted during the session, but at the same time, we want to hear from you. So Rabbi Eger is going to make sure to save some time at the end for questions and comments. So please either drop them in the chat or save them for the end, and we'll make sure to call on you make sure to save lots of time for us to have a discussion. Thirdly, all comments in the chat do need to be pertinent to the topic at hand. Any comments that are not about what we're talking about, we're going to have to delete, and I appreciate your understanding that these things can be challenging to manage with a large group. So without further ado, let me read the bio of our speaker, and then we'll say the blessing for study, and then we'll turn it over to her. Rabbi Denise Eger is the interim executive director of A Wider Bridge, an organization that connects the LGBTQ Israeli community with the North American LGBTQ and Jewish communities, and fights anti-Semitism in the LGBTQ community. She is the founding rabbi and rabbi emerita of Congregation Kol Ami in West Hollywood, California, and a past president of the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the international organization of Reform rabbis. She was the first openly gay person to serve in that role. Rabbi Eger is a noted speaker and author of 3 books, one of which we just mentioned in the chat. She is a longtime activist for LGBTQ plus rights and women's rights, and most recently contributed a chapter to the book Sacred Struggle, A Jewish Response to Trauma. She's married to Rabbi Eleanor Steinman and is a mom and a grandmother living in Austin, Texas. And we're going to say the blessing for study together here, and then we'll turn things over to Rabbi Eger. So let me just share my screen briefly, and if you'd like, you can join me in this blessing. Let's say together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed is the eternal source of the universe, whose commandments make us holy, and who encourages us, who commands us, la'asok, to immerse, to engage ourselves in words of Torah. Rabbi Denise Eger, take it away.
Thank you, Rabbi Streifer. Thank you for inviting me and Wider Bridge to participate with Laasok. And it's so nice to see so many people here today, and some faces that I recognize and who are a part of either our Austin Temple Beth Shalom, hi Masha, or our Wider Bridge universe. And for those of you I haven't met yet, I'm very happy to know you. In the chat, we're going to put the link to the Sefaria sheet for today. Here it is, in case some of you want to bring up the Sefaria sheet that I'm going to be teaching from. And I'm going to share my screen here as well. And I just want to say, as a longtime queer activist in the LGBT community, not only in the reform movement, but nationwide and internationally, it is Pride Month around the world. I just left Israel from the Jewish Federation of North America Pride mission, and left just before the newest round of hostilities with Iran started. Because of course the bombings from Iran. And so I just want to say a quick word that a Wider Bridge has a staff member in Israel. We share him with the Agudah, which is the LGBT national organization and community center in Tel Aviv, Imri Zaguri. And I've been in touch nonstop with Imri, and they are really stepped up incredibly their work, which they've already been doing, but and particularly since October 7th with those in reserves and those spouses and boyfriends and girlfriends and others whose spouses have been called to, partners and been called up for reserve duty, offering support. But in this newest round, they've really ramped it up this weekend. They had emergency meetings and are serving meals and helping those whose homes have already been bombed and attacked. And so, I mean, our Israeli community, LGBT community, is as resilient as the larger community, and are doing incredible work right now. So this is the work that A Wider Bridge does. You can check us out at awiderbridge.org, AWIDERBRIDGE.org, all one word, as well as do incredible work. We've been really finding anti-Semitism, and particularly this Pride season. We've seen so much anti-Semitism, more than usual, in cities across not just the U.S., but all through North America and worldwide. And so Wider Bridge has been helping and consulting with communities, Jewish communities and LGBT communities, and training people how to keep people safe during this Pride season, especially. So it's appropriate that we're going to look at some of these issues within Judaism and today, and we're going to look at some traditional text, and then we're going to actually look at some of the resolutions that the Reform movement put forth. And this is not to diss any of our other denominational partners in the conservative movement or Reconstructionist movement, but the Reform movement is still the largest organized movement with denomination within the at least North American Jewish community, and has really in many ways set the tone for other denominations in their embrace of the LGBTQ community, certainly true of the conservative movement, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But I want to go straight to the texts because, these are the texts are from our Torah, even from the Talmud, Midrash, that have been used often for centuries to help destroy, bash, and keep LGBTQ people in a really difficult place. But I do want to say that there are many texts of hope, not just texts of terror. And there are many texts that we can lift up and utilize. And there's a tremendous amount of misunderstanding and misuse of particular texts within the Jewish tradition, not only in the Jewish community, but certainly in the Christian and evangelical and Islamic communities, citing verses, as we'll get to in Leviticus and other places, but without a lot of actual understanding of what's going on there. So we're going to dive in. And I think to begin with this, we have to start at the beginning, right? We have to start at Bereshit, and we have to start at the first of the creation stories. And we have to dive in first to Genesis 1:26. Vayomer Elohim na'aseh Adam b'tzalmenu kidmutenu v'yarod b'dagat hayam v'of v'hashamayim v'hema b'kol ha'aretz b'kol ha'remesh ha'remes al ha'aretz. And God said, let us make humans in our image, after our likeness, right? And I want to just focus on that. What does that mean, right? But salmenu demutenu. What does it mean to create humanity in our image? And this foundational statement is really important. First of all, we have to note that God's talking in the plural. Most commentators will say it's the royal we, if you will. But there's lots of midrashim and lots of stories of the rabbis. Who's God talking to here? Who's the us? The us in some of them is the heavenly hosts, right? The many angels. We are made in the angelic image, all of human beings. Are we angels according to the rabbis? No, not always, but not actually. There's a whole angelology within Jewish tradition and certainly in the Kabbalistic tradition. But we are important, and I think that is, as human beings are seen as important and part of creation. So with that, as we move on, I think this understanding that we are created b'tselem Elohim is a foundational theological argument for the inclusion and welcome of LGBTQ plus Jews in Judaism and LGBTQ plus people in the framework and rainbow of humanity. And I think this is really important because we have to stop with that statement. The opportunities for dehumanization, that somehow queer people are not fully human, is at its core the core of homophobia, of transphobia, that somehow we are lesser. And I just can't say this enough. If you felt that, if you've been attacked, you have to understand that we in our Jewish world, believe that all human beings, all humanity was created in the divine image. It is a foundational statement. And if you've been harmed, if you've suffered hate or hurt because you've been dehumanized because of your sexuality or gender identity, I want to just say aloud again, you are part of the divine plan according to Jewish tradition. If we move on to the second Genesis story, as you know, there's two Genesis stories of creation. The first is kind of a general human being, Adam created. In the second story, in chapter 2, is where in Genesis we get male and female. We get the Adam and Eve story that everyone's much more familiar with, right? And in the Adam and Eve story in Genesis 2:18, it says, and Adonai, God said, it is not good that this human should be alone. I will make him a helpmeet. So mean someone, and it's Ezer Kenegdo here is the word for helpmeet or helper, or someone that we today would call, the other half. Your other half. We say that colloquially in English. Oh, well, please meet my other half. As if we're one part one being that's in two parts. And that concept is certainly important in philosophy, but it also makes its way into Judaism as well. Um, and this notion that there was a single entity that is divided into two pieces, or the story that we know from Genesis 2, where uh, woman is taken from the rib or the side of the first human being, is a really important idea, um, of this, that we are all part of the same entity. In in the first creation story, when it says God made male and female, without giving it Adam and Eve, right? There are many interpretations now of this, that it's not just to be read male and female in a binary, but there's an understanding now and a midrashic explanation that it's male to female, to rethink the gender spectrum in an entirely different way, that it will include many variations of gender identity on that spectrum. So these are part and parcel of how we look at Torah. And I know Rabbi Streifer's been such a great teacher of this. We Jews don't just interpret Torah in a single literal way, peshat, in the simple literal translation of the text. A valid Jewish interpretation and Jewish understanding comes from the notion of pardes, entering the garden, but it's an abbreviation for peshat, the simple understanding, uh, 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 remez, the secrets that are revealed, the hints, seter, the mystical understanding, and then drash, pardes, right? Drash, that we have a long history of rabbis' explanation, homilies, interpretations. So pardes is a valid way to approach the text, and it's just as valid to interpret it male and female. God created them to not just see it in that binary, but see it as that spectrum, male to female. Okay, there's mentions, if we go in the Genesis story, and particularly the Noah story, we like the Noah story, not just for the rainbow, which has become the symbol of pride, of our Pride Month and Pride flag, but there is a story at the end of when Noah and his children are trying to repopulate the earth, of this kind of funky story in Genesis 9, where they plant vineyards. Noah gets really, really drunk, and Ham, one of the sons, the father of Canaan, and this is the phrase that's often used, saw the nakedness of his father and has told his two brothers. That phrase, saw the nakedness of his brother, you'll see in uh, many texts as a kind of a euphemism for sexual activity. And here there's an implication that Ham was cursed because of some kind of sexual encounter with his father. Okay, we could say, oh yeah, that is gay sex. Is that gay sex, or is that really a taboo about incest between parents and children? So there's a lot of confusion often um, in biblical criticism, used as theological rhetoric, and confusion, and where we often get this notion, oh, gays are just pedophiles, right? That myth, that's just part of the myth, to put all kinds of sexual taboos under one house. Again, another way to gaslight gay people, another way to gaslight queer folk. But again, this it has a roots right here in this text. Okay, let's go to the kind of central texts, which always are thrown in LGBTQ people's face. I call them, these are our texts of terror. They come in the book of Leviticus, um, and they come in a section known as the Holiness Code. And there's a lot of discussion as whether this is directed at every person, or are these rules specifically for the Levites, and the Kohanim rules specifically for the priests, the priesthood. And I'll mention why that is in a moment. So here's the very famous: if a man lies with a man as with womankind, both of them have committed a to'eva, that's the Hebrew word, an abomination. They shall surely be put to death. Their blood shall be upon them. Right? The ish asher yishkav et zachar, Mishkaveh isha to'eva. Asu shnehem mut yomat demehem bam. We can spend a lot of time parsing the Hebrew, and it is important in part to do that. But the question remains is, what is this word that got translated into English as abomination, which is the word certainly that the evangelicals use a lot, the word to'eva. It's used in many, many other places. Um, that have nothing to do with sexuality. And so we need to understand that it is a toeva, okay? And of course, then it's that brother verse in Leviticus, and you shall not lie carnally with your neighbor's wife to defile thyself with her. And you shall not give any of your seed to set them apart to Molech, the ancient god. Neither shall you profane the name of your God. I am Adonai. You shall not lie with mankind as a womankind. It is abomination, and you shall not lie with any beast to defile themselves with therewith, nor any woman stand before the beast to lie down thereto. Again, lumping all of these sexual, quote unquote, perversions together, bestiality, uh, of homosexuality, and of course, this pagan rite of giving your seed to Moloch, fertility rites. And this is why we put this in here is very important to understand what's going on here, because in the ancient world, when people did ancient worship in their pagan religions, it was kind of sometimes hard for us in the 21st century to imagine what that's like. My goodness, we have a hard enough time trying to just understand the sacrifices that went on in our ancient temple, let alone to understand all of what happened in the ancient Near East and the pagan religions. But sexuality and fertility rights was critically important. And anybody who's ever traveled to Greece or to Egypt, you've seen the statues with the giant phalluses. You can always buy a keychain with that somewhere on Mykonos if you want. But this issue of fertility rights and that have to do with not only having children, but what also has to do with the land is a very critical. And oftentimes in the ancient world, priests and priestesses of pagan religions were what today we might call sex surrogates. They were stand-ins for the gods and goddesses. And when you went to the ancient temples, of the ancient pagan temples, there were fertility rites that often were used as a way not only to create abundance in the land, right, that the gods would be bless the land and the land would be fertile, but also that the people would be fertile. And you often had sex with the priest or priestess. So we have to take a look at the Levitical context in this very way. What is happening these Levitical passages, are they actually forbidding what we know today as being gay or lesbian? Or are they telling us in a book that is primarily aimed at priests? Are they really telling us that our priests are not sex stand-in surrogates, fertility surrogates, in the way that the pagans are? And I think this is a very, very, very important section. So I want to just look here. I'm going to just jump down. The Canaanites, Rabbi Michelle Brand Medwin wrote, the Canaanites used homosexual acts as part of their pagan rituals. Therefore, the Israelites were prohibited from doing this, not because it was an act between two men, but because it was symbolic of pagan ritual. In today's world, this prohibition has no meaning, and homosexuality basically is permitted. And we must look at also the book by our colleague, our wonderful colleague, Rabbi Steve Greenberg, one of the first openly gay Orthodox rabbis, who wrote a magnificent book, Wrestling with God and Men. And then this also comes up in the book by Saul Olin and With a Male. We're going to look at these two things, but we have to look at this word toeva that I mentioned. First of all, what does the word toeva mean? How is it used? First, if we go back to the Joseph story, one of my favorite stories in the Torah, when he is reconciled with his brothers in that story, and he invites his brothers to dine with him, Joseph doesn't sit down at the same table with him. Remember, he is an Egyptian god at this point, right? He is part of the royalty in Egypt. And it tells us that he Egyptians do not eat with Hebrews because it is a to'eva, the same exact word that we ran into in the Levitical passage. So idolatry, sexual offenses, magical practices, food prohibitions, all of them are described as to'eva in the Torah. One traditional Jewish commentary defines to'eva as an acronym, actually. It's not like a real word, but it means that which leads one astray. And finally, this is where Rabbi Greenberg and Saolian agree. Scholarly definitions tell us that it means something that offends the accepted order. Well, the accepted order changes, my friend. It changes through time and history. And today, I would say to each of you, what is the toeva? It is not two men loving each other. It is not two women making a household or loving each other. The toeva is the attack on our trans siblings. The toeva is the exclusion and discrimination against LGBTQ plus people. That is the toeva in our time. And we have to have the courage, I really believe, as liberal Jews, not to sacrifice, if you will, our authority or our worldview to the Orthodox rabbinate or to anyone else. We have a sense of community and power in ourselves to understand that the world is different than the ancient world. We don't worship in the temple anymore. We're not worrying about the pagans that are running. Well, maybe we are, but certainly not in the way the Torah has this anxiety about paganism and idolatry creeping in. We have to have the sense of ourselves as created in the divine and holy image of the Holy One of blessing. And we have to assert with the exact knowledge of our very fiber of our DNA that we are holy and made in that divine image. So I commend these to you, these texts to you in such a way to to really kind of shift your mindset, right, about what the Torah says and an approach to it, and these words which have been misunderstood and misused to hurt and harm our queer family and friends. If we jump to the Talmud, and I think this is one of those other theological underpinnings that is really, really, really critical, I think, in understanding LGBTQ uh, acceptance, inclusion, celebration, if you will, today. And that is from Brachot 19b, the Gemara, Ta'ashma, uh, Gadol Kavod, right? Gadol Kavod. It is common here. Great is human dignity as it overrides a prohibition in the Torah, right? That means that holding up another human's dignity is more important than some of the thou shalt nots. And so with this very verse and this very understanding, we have to say, okay, the Torah said, man shouldn't lie with a man as he lies with a woman. But the human dignity surrounding that couple and those people are really, really critical. And so that is another link in the chain for that theological underpinning of inclusion and welcome that we certainly used in the early days of fighting for equality for LGBTQ Jews within the Reform movement. Now, why am I focusing on it? It's not just because I'm a Reform rabbi and was a past president of the CCAR or was involved in trying to push the boundaries of the Reform movement, but these resolutions passed both at the Union for Reform Judaism, which is the synagogue arm of the Reform movement, and the Central Conference of American Rabbis, which is the rabbinic arm, actually become the basis in a lot of Jewish life, Jewish communal life, for continuing to welcome and include LGBTQ plus people. In 2000, I'm going to go through some of these resolutions and some of this history in just a minute, because we have to understand the Reform movement was early on one of the first part of the Jewish community that called for inclusion of LGBTQ plus people. And in fact, it was the National Federation of Temple Sisterhoods, the now known as the Women for Reform Judaism, is the first on official record of calling for the decriminalization of consensual sexual acts between adults in the early 60s. This is a really critical beginning of taking a stand on behalf of LGBTQ people and our civil rights. Um, and if we look here, even as early here in 1995, the reform movement was already working very hard on behalf of LGBTQ Jews to promote equal employment and leadership opportunities for LGBTQ Jews within our movement. Right? Among our most sacred Jewish values is the fundamental principle that we are all created in the divine image, right? It's not just a civil rights act. This is a religious act. We give it a theological foundation. All Jews, whatever their sexual orientation, are welcome in the Reform movement. That is a critical foundational statement. Now, before this, the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, had debated all through the 80s about whether gay and lesbians, and I'll talk about trans folks in a minute. I don't know, not to exclude trans or bi folk, but it wasn't our language in the 80s, to be honest with you. And so again, I'm not saying this to be exclusive because there's lots now on trans and bi folks in terms of the inclusion and updating all of the updating the resolution. So I want to just give a shout out to that and be honest with you. Um, in the in 1990, that the Central Conference of American Rabbis basically forced the hand of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, which is the seminary of the Reform movement, forced the hand by resolution to admit openly gay and lesbian folks to the rabbinate and the cantorate and as Jewish educators. Before that time, and I was ordained before that time, you lived in fear of being kicked out of school. You lived in fear of not being ordained. It was pretty awful. And for someone like me who had kind of lived in what I used to call the plexiglass closet, it wasn't too hard to see it. You know what I mean? Um, but we really lived we lived with a tremendous amount of fear. I can tell you for anybody from San Francisco or the West Coast, California, he became he was a San Francisco supervisor and then became an assemblyman and eventually state senator. Mark Leno. Mark Leno was one of those people. He was a Hebrew Union College rabbinic student um, who left Hebrew Union College because of the gay issue. I mean, now he went on to great leadership and fighting for LGBTQ civil rights. But what a chaval that this incredible leader, an incredible man, was not there to serve the Jewish people as a rabbi. I mean, and I think about hundreds and thousands of LGBTQ people through the centuries, and particularly now in this modern era, who couldn't serve in that time before. So, the fact that we've moved and we've moved beyond is incredible. And here in this on the sheet, you can see a record of a number of the then UAHC, now Union for Reform Judaism resolutions. Dating back as early as 1987, that sexual orientation should not be consideration for membership or participation in any member congregation, right? These are laying the groundworks for this inclusion. In 1989, the UAHC, then now URJ, reaffirmed its commitment to promoting full congregational membership opportunities for gay and lesbian Jews as single couples and families. Here's the 1990 resolution that I mentioned about admitted for membership and inclusion to become rabbis and cantors in 93. The then UAHC called to extend the same benefits that are offered to spouses of married staff members and employees to the partners of lesbian and gay people. Now remember, 1993, we really weren't talking so much about marriage equality. We were just beginning the marriage equality battle. And if those of you who were in the battle like I was, this was the beginning of the Hawaii case, Bear versus Hawaii, where Evan Wolfson, a great leader of the LGBTQ community and a great involved Jewish community member, began the battle and really the structure for understanding how we would get to the marriage equality legal cases through the years. So the reform movement was at the beginning of that and supportive of that, supportive of trying to reverse what was DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act, which defined marriage between one man and one woman under Bill Clinton's time, and or the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. The reform movement protested that on Congress, and Rabbi David Saperstein, who was the head of our Religious Action Center in Washington, testified numerous times on Capitol Hill for LGBTQ rights. So these things you might think of, oh, they're just resolutions. They don't really mean anything, but they do mean something, and they do ultimately matter because these things laid the pathway for institutional changes. And these institutional changes of inclusion are something we now see throughout the Jewish world, so much so that, as I said, I was on a Jewish Federations of North America Pride mission last week at this time. To think that federations and Jewish community centers across the spectrum would be inclusive and welcoming and celebrating pride in their communities, and marching in the pride parades as the Jewish community. This is really, really historic. Even here in Austin last year, with my wife's synagogue, Temple Beth Shalom, the Jewish Federation marched alongside Shalom Austin, and even the Israel American Council. We have a big Israeli population here in Austin. And like this is just something that's so special and so unique. And if we look back even 25 or 30 years ago, a short time, a lifetime, these things, the rapid change that we've been able to make is frankly incredible. And these resolutions help to do that. I'll let you read some of the others and some of these other texts because I do want to leave some time for comments and questions. Um, I do want to tell you that I don't want to forget our trans family and non-binary folks because you are so much a part of this rainbow and so much and so important. And also to acknowledge the horrific, horrific um, ways in which you are being demonized at this time in the United States and around the world. And I want you to know, as a lesbian who's fought her whole life for queer rights, you are at the forefront of my fight. I have not abandoned you, nor will I. It is part and parcel of what we stand for as the Jewish people, and I know certainly in the Reform movement we do, and I believe my conservative movement and Reconstructionist movement friends and lots of secular Jewish friends stand with this community. And so I did say I want you to know that the language has been updated, and so I have to tell you that I'm really proud that this URJ resolution in 2015 on the rights of transgender and nonconforming people was passed not only by the URJ, um, but then I became president of the CCAR, the Central Conference of American Rabbis, in 2016, and it was the first act of my presidency that the CCAR passed a similar resolution on transgender rights and nonconforming people. And these things provide why these resolutions are important are because they provide a roadmap for the boards and the organizations to make policy and to take action and to speak on behalf of these organizations, whether that's in the public square, writing an op-ed by the CEO, or um, working on Capitol Hill for the passage of Employment Non-Discrimination Acts or Equality Act that includes trans rights. So, lest we think these things are just a bunch of words on paper, it's how we use them that matters. And you have to have, and that is why it's important for our Jewish organizations to speak and to speak up. And I have to say, some of my proudest moments as CCR presidents was sitting at the table of the conference of presidents of major Jewish organizations, which is like a round table of national Jewish organizations that tries to speak on one voice on behalf of the Jewish community. Not an easy task because you got right-wing organizations and left-wing organizations and everything in the middle. Some Hadassah's there, National Council of Women, J Street, AIPAC, Reform Movement, Conservative Movement. It's a real mishmash of all kinds of organizations. But you know, um, the only reason I liked sitting there well, let me just say it this way. I didn't like sitting there because the misogyny was really high, and there were very few women sitting at that table in 2016 and 2017 um, as leaders or of either CEOs or as presidents of organizations. But I will say that some of my happiest moments were making some of our uh, right wing folks uncomfortable, that they had to deal with me, that they had to deal with us queer people, and that we were not going to be quiet anymore or ever hide who we are. We are never going back in the closet. And this is so important for us to take what we understand as these theological foundational points and to always speak forth with truth, with honesty, with clarity, and with a with a neshama, with a soul that speaks to our humanity. That we cannot sacrifice our humanity in any way, shape, or form. And we must demand from the Jewish community and ultimately the larger world that we live in that our humanity is acknowledged and celebrated. And so I'm just going to conclude. We're going to have some time. I want to conclude with a reading from Mishkan Ga'ava. I'm just going to reach back here because um, and then we'll have time for Q&A. We'll have about 15 minutes for Q&A. And this book was published it's already 5 years old, and we've been kind of talking. I see Joy, are you still there? Please tell Annie and I've been talking about a new version of Mishkan Ga'ava. We've been in conversation, so tell her it's needed. I see you're on here. I want to just say a Mishaberach in closing of my comments for our queer community that I wrote. May the one who blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Moses, Aaron, and David, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel, Miriam, and Ruth, bless this community. May we know love, friendship, joy, and blessing. We are a rainbow people. As you place the rainbow in the sky as a promise of hope for all time, make our lives into a promise of hope as well. Help us to feel your divine presence when others may question the righteousness of our lives. Let us come to know that all things are possible. Love and hope, caring, friendship, and family. May those of us who are deep within the closet find courage and comfort through you, God. We give thanks for our allies and friends. Help them to stand with us in our work to bring about equality. Give them the courage to speak out when others try to attack our LGBTQ plus community. Give them and us strength to overcome the stereotypes that too often cause our rainbow people pain. Bless our community and its leaders and keep us from all harm. Grant us, O God, health and prosperity, and keep us strong as we pursue justice and civil rights. Ease the pain of those who are ill and inspire each of us to perform acts of loving kindness each and every day. V'nomar, Amen, and let us say, Amen. And with that, we'll take some of your questions. Micah, how do you want to do this, Rabbi? Do
Let's
you want to
see.
just have people raise their hands or
Yeah,
call
I
them
think the
in?
best thing is to raise your hand electronically, or you can put a question in the chat. While we're waiting for people to do that, let me just reiterate two things that I put in the chat, which is that um, Laasok has a class coming up in October with Rabbi Nikki DeBlasi called Why Queer Inclusion Matters in Judaism. It is drop-in and free, and I'm just going to put it into the chat, so please do join us. We also are going to be launching a queer Parsha study group, also taught by Rabbi Nikki DeBlasi, who's a wonderful teacher, by the way, and that'll start in October at Bereshit. If you're interested, I don't have details yet, but if you're interested, email me at that address that I just put in the chat, and I will just put you on a list and let you know once I know more, but it'll be starting in October. So if there are questions, please raise your hand, and I'll just start us off, Rabbi Eger, I had a question, and then actually something that David put in the chat sort of addressed my question, which was it's in some ways kind of theological. It was about how do you square the Genesis helpmeet story, which is so heteronormative, right? A man, a woman, that seems to be Genesis's story. How do you square that with progressive Jewish ideas about there being a spectrum of gender identity? And if I can, before you answer, if I can just quote what David Foyer put in the chat, and then I'll maybe let you respond both to my question and to his answer. He wrote, I have to find it now. God separated day from night, but stretched morning and evening between them. God separated water from dry land, but stretched the shore between them. So I appreciated that sort of notion of a spectrum, even amidst the binaries. So there's my first question, maybe to start us
Yeah,
off.
I totally think that's right. I'm not much of a binary type person in that sense. And look, I've spent my whole rabbinic career, my whole professional career in the intersection of Jewish and queer, to be honest with you. I was the rabbi in LA for Queer LA since 1988. They founded our synagogue in West Hollywood, in 93. I was at the first gay synagogue in Beth Chaim Chashrim for 5 years in LA. I mean, not just the first in LA, but the first that was admitted to the UAHC, the first ever, even before there was a CBST in New York or Shar Zahav in San Francisco. So I guess my experience both in the real world with human beings and also reading our text is to understand that there is a wide range of humanity, including gender, not just sexual orientation, but in gender identity. There's lots of different kinds of people in the world. And I mean, our Talmud understood this even in the ancient world and identified at least six genders in the world, right? Not, we today, the right wing is so stuck on, identifying men and women as male and females as if there's only two genders. But, any scientist can tell you that people have multiple chromosomes. They can have XX and XY and two X and a Y and two Ys. I mean, like there's all kinds of ways in which human beings are crafted in the world. And so gender is not simply just one or the other. And I think our rabbis understood real life in that way. And I think the Talmud reflects that they understood that there were intersex people, and they understood that there were masculine men and feminine women. And these are the social constructs we use today. But so I appreciate that spectrum, and that's I think why I mentioned earlier going back to the first Genesis story, that male and female. That one way we interpret that is not male and female, but male to female, like that there is this spectrum, and that's why I said drosh is an acceptable interpretation mode. You have to understand what are the rules of interpretation in Jewish tradition. So that was why I talked about pardes, and that yes, pashat is one way we understand it, but drash is another way. And so it is an acceptable drash to understand that there's a spectrum, male to female, and everything in between is included in that. Everything.
Nice, thank you. If there are other questions, please raise your hand. And in the meantime, I have another question. You talked a lot about the internal institutional changes over the course of the last, really 50 years or so. And I wonder, clearly there's external work to do, especially maybe particularly in the United States, but not only. What work do you feel like there still is to do within maybe the reform movement or within our progressive Jewish community?
Well, first of all, there's tons of work in the Jewish community, not just in the reform movement or Reconstructionist or conservative movement, right? There's certain issues that you have to always reteach because there's always a new generation, first of all. And LGBTQ plus issues are ones that we can't just think is one and done because there's always new people that grow up and become adults. There's always new people who struggle with their sexuality and gender identities. And so we always have to reinforce and reteach the messages of inclusion, welcome, and not just inclusion and welcome and tolerance are not enough, celebration, and centering the voices of queer people. This is the last step that a lot of organizations don't do. They think, oh, yeah, y'all can come be a part of us, but then they don't want to highlight or celebrate trans voices, queer voices, not just as focus of leadership, but that when we express our culture, which is different than kind of heterosexual mainstream culture sometimes, we have a queer culture, and we have a queer Jewish culture. And, you know, it's great that the Federation does a Pride mission. It's really great. This is like such progress. It's huge. But if I had a criticism of that Pride mission, which I've shared with them already, it didn't have queer culture as part of it. And you don't do a queer cultural aspect. I have my pronouns in my name on the Zoom, so you all knew right away that I was she, her. But like if you're in a Jewish meeting and you're wearing a name tag and the Jewish organization doesn't automatically say have their pronouns on their name tag, like, or a place to put them, or right, like that's not okay. Why? I don't want to be making assumptions. We should not. And part of queer culture is not to make those assumptions about anybody's sexuality or about their gender identity. It's not just common courtesy. There's a reason that we do this. And that's part of our queer culture. So I would say that. And I would say certainly there's plenty of places in the Orthodox world that needs our help. And plenty of places of people that grow up in that world or the day school world, Orthodox day school world of kids that need an out, need a safe space. And there's still plenty of places that are pushing conversion therapy down our throats in the Jewish world as well. And so there's lots of work to do. We need to do more work on accepting in our reform movement on non-binary and trans work, and we need to help our kids. And we need to be advocates for them and our adults, especially in the world, at least in the US. And I think Canada gets a little bit of this by kind of like on the side, because, as a runover from the US, of really making sure that our trans and non-binary folk have the access to healthcare and medicine that they need, just like we would do for anybody. That's a Jewish value of taking care of one another and taking care of those in society that need help. It's not just a political act, it's a religious act. And so that's part of what I think we still have lots of work left to do. And thank goodness for organizations like A Wider Bridge that do this, and Keshet that does this, and in the Orthodox queer world, Eshel that does it, JQY for Jewish Queer Youth, and JQI on the West Coast, JQ International that does this work. I mean, this is really important stuff.
Thank you. I see D. D, if you're able to unmute and ask your question.
I am. Well, first off, thank you. As I put in the comments, Rabbi Eger, the Mishkan Gava has been revolutionary for me. I'm the first openly transgender person serving on my synagogue board. So
Mazel tov.
thank you. Thank you. And I'm gonna have a bit of chutzpah here because I don't have a question, I have a comment.
Please.
You were talking about a scientific perspective into Genesis. And when I was studying Acharei Mot last year and got into trouble, by the way, for my drush on the Saturday morning. But anyway, I the one thing that occurred to me is the scientific perspective on homosexuality. Like if you look at how people have studied, particularly mammals, there's a huge amount of homosexuality in nature. And then if you read the
Yes.
rabbinic commentary, if you read the Gemara and then you read the rabbinic commentators through the Middle Ages, none of them examine this language at all. They're just like, oh
Yes.
no, this is gay. We know what this is, you know. But we're allowed to go back and re-examine things when science tells us actually what you believe is not that way. And
Yes.
Acharei Mot also includes a bat being a bird in the kashrut laws.
Yes. Oh, thank you for that. I so appreciate your comment. So
Yeah.
it's so right on. We have to, like I think, like God didn't create us with, you know, with brains and curiosity to check them at the door. And I always say, like, if a religion wants you to check your brain at the door, you should head out that back door really fast. We are curious people. We are thirst for knowledge. And when we encounter new things and we encounter new discoveries and peel back layers, there's revelation happening around us all the time. We have to consider that. And we have to consider how that impacts our theology and our philosophy and our day-to-day life, right? Did the ancient rabbis kind of understand AI? I barely understand AI. And we're going to have to adapt. Judaism's going to have to adapt for that all the time, just like we adapt to everything. And your insights, Dee, are just so spot on about observing nature, and that this is not something that they paid any attention to. I mean, pretty much they were shut up in the yeshivot all day. So what did they go out? They didn't go outside that much. So, um,
Yeah,
to
I've
understand.
often commented, you want humor in the Talmud, go read rabbis' opinions on women's bodies and how
Yes,
they work.
exactly. They don't have any idea. They have no idea. So thank you for that. I appreciate it. And really good luck for being such a glass ceiling breaker in your community. And really, no, it's really
Thanks.
important. It's hard to step out. It's hard to be courageous. And I really just want to applaud you for that. Congratulations.
So
Thank you.
we now have 3 minutes left and 3 questions. So
We'll do it
um,
fast.
all right, we'll do so real quick in the chat. Let's just do this. I'll read really quickly the 2 questions, then maybe we can call on Doreen and Eric to ask their questions quickly, and then you give a kind of a closing statement, Rabbi Eger. Is that
Sure.
okay?
Great.
All
We'll do
right.
that.
So one question was about whether queer congregations will become victims of the movement's success, as will there no longer be a need for specifically LGBTQ plus spaces. Another question, which could be an hour in and of itself, is about anti-Semitism that people are experiencing within the LGBTQ plus community. And then can I just invite Doreen and Eric to very quickly state your questions, and then we'll just let Rabbi Eger finish with a last statement. Doreen, go ahead.
I'm embarrassed. I'm going to sound like a Neanderthal, and I don't mean to. Okay, enough apology. Could you say a little bit about what queer culture is as opposed to non-queer culture?
All right.
Okay. And the next question? We'll
My
go with it.
question is about why gender and sexuality is prioritized by conservatives, mostly Christianity, because they cite the Old Testament when they talk about sexuality, but they don't seem as concerned with other abominations. For example, they eat non-kosher
Shrimp.
food on Jesus's birthday, who probably was kosher. So
Right.
that's my question. Why do they center it,
Right.
even as far as like judging other people's lives?
Right.
Thanks.
Okay. Mike, am I ready to go?
Go for it. Whatever
Okay,
you can
so
do in the
I'm
last
gonna
couple
say,
minutes we have left.
I'm gonna go say a word about the queer culture and queer synagogue space. Yes, a lot of queers. There used to be an entire movement of LGBTQ plus synagogues. Many have collapsed as there have been greater opening and welcoming in more mainstream congregations. Some of those congregations, like for example in Philadelphia or Chicago, have kind of become Havarot, LGBTQ Havarot in mainstream congregations, which tells you, interestingly, that there's still a need for queer space. And I do believe there's a need for queer space, and precisely to the cultural question, there is a need for an expression, not only just to meet fellow queer people that look like us, or sound like us, or love like us, but also there is a kind of a language, just like there's a Jewish culture and a Jewish humor and a Jewish way of relating to the world. There's also an LGBTQ humor and LGBTQ way of relating in the world, because we see the world through different set of eyes. And perhaps because we're a minority within a minority, or have been lived at the margins in a certain way, there's a way that you learn to navigate the world. And so there's a commonality in that is shared among LGBTQ people. So I still think there is a need for queer-only spaces, queer-only Jewish spaces. That's not to the exclusion of being part of the mainstream. I feel like I try to do both. We need to figure out a way, just the way synagogues have worked in North America in particular, and the funding streams. It's hard for any small synagogue anywhere. It doesn't matter whether they're queer or not to function and to thrive, just from a funding basis, because the way the the way the synagogues needs are met in these days and time. So many of our queer synagogues were not as funded as well as some of the bigger ones. So that has had its toll as well. But we do need a place to share queer culture and to develop queer culture. Like I'm someone who was the rabbi who buried almost all the Jews with HIV/AIDS in LA between 88 and the early 90s, before there were drugs that helped people stay alive longer. And that created its own culture. And I wrote a lot about this in that book, A Sacred Struggle, that Rabbi Streifer mentioned, that on my newest contribution is all about the AIDS crisis and my work in that era. So I do think that we have some unique things that are special that are different than mainstream culture, and we shouldn't assume that the mainstream imprint of a husband and wife and kids is the same imprint for a LGBTQ family. Some of us do have kids. I'm a mom. My son is 31, and I had it with my ex-wife, and now we have grandparents, like, so that is the same as a lot of people my age that are in mainstream world. But we also have unique things. He grew up with two moms and a gay dad, which was really different. And at the time, none of the Jewish day schools wanted to have our family be part of it because they couldn't deal with it. So my kid didn't get a Jewish day school education as a result. So there's lots to be had here. And I guess the last question that will, I don't know, Mike, I think we don't have any more time to this question.
We might just have to do this again sometime.
Let's look at different texts. Let's look at gender identity and look at the spectrum of gender identity and study those together and talk about that.
Sounds good. Well, let me say thank you, a huge thank you to Rabbi Denise Eger for this, for spending this hour with us, for teaching us, for bringing up all these really important issues. I'm grateful to all of you for being here and participating and for your questions and comments. And
Hey, Micah, I just dropped in the chat. There was a question about anti-Semitism, and here is the Wider Bridge did a very big report on Pride Safe 2025, and it's our report on unsafe spaces. You get links to it on this website page about our Pride and keeping it safe in 2025, and there's a huge report that you can link to on that page. So just not to ignore the anti-Semitism question, but come to awiderbridge.org and you can see the full report on this issue.
Wonderful. And I hope you'll join me in praying for a more peaceful and safer world in all the ways that we need that right now in Israel, across the Middle East, and across the world. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you soon.